So it's a warm night. I have my window open, and my neighbors are listening and commenting on my recording. But we're going to make another attempt at Rumplestiltskin. We are going to read the Jeanne Steig version. This is because Multiverse of Geekdom, whose videos you should watch, had read Tom Tit Tot, which is the English version of this. He's reading English fairy tales. So I am going to be reading adaptations of those same fairy tales. So, Jeanne Steig's Rumpelstiltskin. A poor miller went to sell flour to the king, and when he had finished his business, he couldn't resist a bit of bragging. "My daughter," he said, "is more beautiful than all the flowers in your majesty's garden." "Ho-hum," said the king. "What's more," the miller went on, "she is far more clever than all your majesty's wise men." "Well, isn't that nice?" yawned the king. "And," said the miller, who couldn't begin to control his tongue, "that girl can spin straw into gold." "Why, the sweet thing! She sounds enchanting," said the king, who was known far and wide for his greed. "Bring her around tomorrow at dawn. I'll give her a little test." There was nothing the foolish miller could do but deliver his poor daughter up to the king, who wasted no time, but led her at once to a huge room full of straw. "There is your wheel," he told her. "Get busy, my girl. You have till tomorrow morning to spin every blade of this straw into gold." "That cannot be done," she cried. But the king said only, "If you fail, you die," and he left her, locking the door behind him. When she was alone, she sat herself down at the wheel, gazed at the mountain of straw, and wept, for her beauty was useless, and her cleverness too. All at once the door flew open, and in stomped a bizarre little man with a pickle-shaped nose and a lumpish body. He was just as tall as a sack of grain, and his clothes were outlandish. "What are you bawling and squalling about? Some fiddle-dee-diddle, I have no doubt," he roared, with a snaggle-toothed grin. "If I don't spin this straw into gold, I must die," she sobbed, "and it can't be done." "No, it can't be done by you, my dear, as any clod can see. But give me those beads from around your neck and leave the job to me." She gave him her beads, and he took his place at the wheel and began to spin. As the straw raced and the reels filled with gold, he sang, "A handful of straw and a whir, 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 a thistle, a nettle, a cockle-burr, 3 times round and the job is done. The beads are mine and the gold is spun." The sun hardly had time to raise its head when the king arrived. My," he said, staring at his new gold. "What a lovely surprise! We must do this again." And he led the girl into another room full of straw, much larger than the first. "I'll see you tomorrow at dawn," he said. "Spin for your life!" Again the miller's daughter wept, and again the door flew open. "What a terrible snuffle and skreek and moo! It makes my blood run cold when the one little thing you've been asked to do is turn this straw to gold," drawled the odd little person, glancing about with his odd little smile. "But it can't be done," she said. The fellow gave her a little pat and crooned, "Well, it can't be done by you, young miss, not even to please a king. But I'm happy to do the job myself, for the gift of your pretty ring." The girl pulled the little ring from her finger and gave it to him, and he sat down at once and began to spin and sing. "A handful of straw and a whir, 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 peppergrass, pigweed, and cockle-burr, 3 times round and the job is done. The ring is mine and the gold is spun." The king arrived with the sun's first rays, as happy as a hog with a herring to see the room filled with gold, but his greed only grew with his wealth. He led her into a third room still larger than the first 2, saying, "Spin. If you fail, you die. However, if you succeed, I shall make you my wife." "She's only a miller's daughter," he thought, "but I must admit she is a treasure." "This time I am surely lost," she said, and sobbed pitifully. But again the door burst open, and in hopped the strange mannikin. He twirled around on one stubby toe and warbled, Though you've never a trinket left to give, you have nothing whatever to dread, for all I want is your firstborn child, if you and the king are wed." "Perhaps it will never happen," thought the girl. "Perhaps he will forget, and if I refuse I shall surely die." So she gave her word, and once more he spun and sang, "A handful of straw and a whir, 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 knotweed, bindweed, and a cockle-burr, 3 times round and the job is done. The child is mine and the gold is spun." When the king arrived at dawn, he gazed at the glittering room, and shivered with joy. "We must be married, my dear," he said, "at once." And so they were. A year later a daughter was born, and the queen loved her dearly. But one day, as she was playing with the girl, the door burst open, and there stood the gnomish creature smirking. He skipped right up to the child, poked at her, and chortled, "Remember, madam, you gave your word. A year ago this time, you married the king, you bore a child, and the child you bore is mine." The terrified queen offered him all the treasures of the kingdom if she could only keep her daughter, but he laughed and said, "I can enter a twice-locked room, or turn a billy goat into a broom. I can spin riches, silver and gold. 'Tis a living creature I long to hold." The queen was aghast. She trembled and wept so hopelessly and clung to her little girl so desperately that even the scoundrel's heart was softened. He cocked his ugly head, stared at her from under his bushy brows, and said, "A year spins by with a whir, 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 fireweed, bittervetch, cocklebur. I give you 3 days to play my game. You may keep your child if you guess my name." The queen lay awake all night, thinking of every name she had ever heard. And in the morning she sent a messenger out over all the land to discover even more. When the troublesome fellow appeared again, she tried them all. "Is it Caspar, Melchior, or Balthazar?" she inquired. "Is it Crimple, or Blister, or Guggle, or Knack? Willowaw, Flimflam, or Hiccup, or Clank?" But her visitor grinned from one crumpled ear to the other and said, "You have not guessed my name. 2 days remain." On the second day the queen again sent her messenger out to inquire of all the neighbors the most curious names they knew, and when the rascal returned she was ready for him. "Is it Hailstone, or Carbuncle, Jostle, or Clench, Millipede, Doldrum, Persnickety Stench?" But he shook his head with an impudent leer and whooped, "You have not guessed my name. 1 day left of the game." On the third day the queen begged her messenger to ask at every remaining house, no matter how humble, and to bring her every name he could find, no matter how ridiculous. The man went out before dawn and was back near midnight, and when he returned he said, "Your Highness, not one new name could I find, though I searched from thither and Your Highness, not one new name could I find, though I searched from hither and thither, and on to yon. But when at last I reached the high mountain at the end of the deep forest, where the sun and the moon hold hands, I saw a little house with a bonfire burning before it. Around the fire a preposterous mite of a man was capering. He hopped and he leapt and he sang at the top of his lungs. Vinegar, wormwood, gallstone, brine, the child of the queen will soon be mine. Earthquake, firestorm, and hurricane, Rumplestiltskin is my name." "It is indeed," cried the queen, and when that personage appeared, she had to cover her lips, for she could not keep from smiling. "Well now, madam, the final test. Give me my name, or the child at your breast," he demanded, with his fingers twitching, and his mean little eyes afire. "Is it Chibelane, or Earwig, or Dungeon, or Damp? Is it Crumble, or Fumble, or Lumpfish, or Cramp?" "That is not my name. I have won the game," he shouted, and he stretched out his hands for the babe. "Not Foofara, Fistula, Fungus, or Wen? Why, it can't be Rumplestiltskin, then," crowed the queen. "Fire and brimstone, ashes and bile, the devil told you, that old reptile," bawled the creature, and in his fury he stamped his right foot so hard that it sank down into the ground to clear up to his hip and stuck there. "Rumple and Pumple and Stilt and Skin, there's a hole in the ground and my leg's gone in. I'll teach it a lesson, whatever I do. I'll give it a terrible ooh-loo-loo," he thundered, and in a vengeful rage he pulled so ferociously at the leg that he ripped himself clean in two. So that was the end of him at last. Is it wicked to smile? Well, the villain was vile, and as for the king, rapacious old thing, he got all the loot, and a princess to boot. The end.